Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on the multi-annual framework, financial framework, and the recovery plan on an ugly, rainy Brussels morning, as usual this time. My name is Thomas Ilka. I'm the regional director of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation here in Brussels. We have this event under the umbrella of our Restart 21 Reshape Europe campaign. It's one of our major events we will have during the German presidency. And we are very happy to be with all of you here today, this morning. We are joined by Marta Pilati from EPC and Moritz Körner from the European Parliament. Welcome, here they are. Very good to see you. And before I introduce into the matter a little, and of course our two talking guests, some housekeeping rules. We have about an hour to discuss with one another. And you can put questions in the Q&A function, and I will feed in those questions if ever I feel they contribute very good to the discussion we have at hand. So, having said that, coming back to our issue, the multi-annual financial framework and the recovery plan. This needs no further introduction. In these days, it's about big money, about huge differences between member states and a complex political framework, which not only consists of member states, but of course of the European Parliament, of the national parliaments, and of the Commission. All the more, I'm happy to have some really two experts on the matter. On the one hand, more the academic view with Marta Pilati from the EPC. In your CV, Marta, it reads that you are the policy analyst at the European Policy Center, of course, a well-known think tank here in Brussels, and you are really an expert in both cohesion politics and budget politics you now deal with under the umbrella of the EPC. Good to have you here. Welcome. And Moritz, of course, with the Renew group in the European Parliament, sent by the voters of the FDP party in Germany. You are on the Committee on Budgets and on the Committee of Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. and deal a lot with all the budget issues, both the financial framework and the recovery plan. Welcome, Moritz. You are our political voice this morning.
Good morning.
As I said, we are on the eve, if you like, of the coming together of the big chiefs of Europe regarding the member states. The summit taking place a couple of meters from here this weekend, dealing with the issues at hand, the money, the crisis, and the future of Europe. So my first question to both of you is simply, what are your expectations to this weekend? Do you expect a smooth deal? Do you expect a delay, even to some other summits? Do you think expectations are very much overrated? Can they really achieve a deal? What are your feelings towards this? And I think, Marta, ladies first, give us your idea.
Thank you, Thomas. It's nice to be here. Indeed, very timely discussion. So I have to say I'm quite optimistic for this weekend. I think there is a good chance that we'll come out of the weekend with a deal. It won't be easy, so I won't say that the negotiations will be smooth. I wouldn't expect a deal tomorrow night, so let's prepare for indeed a couple of days of negotiations. But I think there is a chance that this is the last one. It is also true that that is not a 100% chance. So there remains a chance that this weekend will just be preparatory work. A lot of discussion to be continued at a later point in time. And in that case, I think it's very likely that the second summit will be relatively soon. There's been a lot of insistence on having a deal before the end of summer, whenever that is. But let's assume that the end of summer is the end of August. Then we are talking about a second summit in a couple of weeks. I think these two options are both relatively good. Of course, the sooner the better, but if a second summit is needed and the deal is reached at the end of July, beginning of August, I wouldn't call that an issue. I think the issue will be if the negotiations drag into September or even later, then I think we really have an issue when it comes to also credibility. Not only economic credibility, but also political. So the signal that the European Union will send is one of fragmentation, of inability to find a common response to a common challenge. But I think that's relatively unlikely. So I would go for a good chance of a deal this weekend. A possible second summit cannot be excluded. But overall, I'm quite optimistic.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. Moritz, do you share Marta's optimism?
Yes, I also see the possibility that there is a compromise this weekend. I think that it will be long hours, long negotiations through the night, but I still think there could be a compromise in the end. There could be a deal, but there's also the chance, and Parliament is actually prepared for both options, that there might be the possibility for a second summit to go back to the capitals and find how far they can go. I think then the second summit could be a little bit earlier than you mentioned, Marta. There's already some talks about next week already, maybe a second summit already to keep the pressure to find a compromise. And of course, this is up to Charles Michel leading the negotiations. What we have to take in mind is that we don't only need a deal in the council, but also the European Parliament needs to approve this for the MFF. And this is why the European Parliament is prepared to come for an extraordinary plenary to give a resolution and a position on the council outcome. So we are prepared to do this next week or the week after. This will be also, of course, interesting, because in the end, when we have the final deal, we have to see that when we have the deal on the overall numbers, we still have to negotiate all the programs. They are already, there are the trilogues on all the programs already between the Parliament and the Council, but then we have to finalize all of this, and then in the end we will have this agreement. But I would absolutely underline what Marta just said. It's important that we find an agreement this summer, because when it drags on to September, October, something like that, I think there will be some reactions to that also economically, and we are already very late. We have to take this in mind. The last MFF, we had an agreement in, I think, May or something like this, and the final agreement with the Parliament and the Council, we're not there yet. We are absolutely not there yet, and the money has to flow until 2020 or from the 1st January on. So it's really we are really late. We have to the programs have to be developed in all the member states. In Germany, they have to be developed by the Bundesländer. So the time is really running, and I think that's why I also hope that the leaders will find a solution this weekend.
Yes, thank you, Moritz, for painting the picture of what comes after the deal. Exactly, the ratification and the programming, which is essential to get the money on the ground. Exactly, but before a deal, of course, there is the work, and there are some essentials we have to talk about. It's a lot of money which is on the table, and my first question with regard simply to the money is this, from your point of view, well shaped? Is it enough money? Is it too much money? Can the member states absorb such sums of money? How is your assessment on that? Maybe Marta, again, give us your academic eye on that.
Thanks. I think the shape of the package is relatively good. I would say that this, to be a new, never done before kind of initiative, it's quite ambitious, actually. We forget that we are talking about the EU borrowing money on the financial markets on behalf of the whole EU, and this has never happened before at this kind of amount. And something that we're just taking for granted that is fine, and this is something that for decades has been shut down by different parties. So first and foremost, I think the fact that there is a new common borrowing, a new common debt, that is already huge. It's, let's say, it can be considered not enough when we consider the kind of economic impact that the union will suffer from this crisis. But I think it has nonetheless the potential of being macroeconomically significant in those countries that will receive the highest amounts. We are talking about transfers, on the basis of the Commission's proposals, transfers that account for several points of GDP in some countries like Greece and others. And this makes an impact. So it's important, and I think it's good enough in its construction. The fact that grants are included, it's also significantly important. A recovery package based only on loans would have been ineffective because the access to funding is not necessarily the issue here. The issue here is is a redistributive nature, which the recovery package has. And I think that this fact has been accepted now, but by almost all member states. Even Rutte from the Netherlands the other day was talking to the Dutch Parliament and was saying, yes, the Dutch position remains in favor of loans only, but he was basically saying this will never be accepted, so get ready for subsidies. So overall, the subsidies part has been accepted. Now we shall see which other issues are more contentious, but maybe I'll leave this for later. Overall, however, I think the construction is relatively good. You mentioned absorption. Yes, this can be an issue indeed. This is a lot of money to be committed in relatively little time. But I'm confident that my member states will know how to use this, especially since the Commission is anyway planning some sort of technical assistance and support. So there is an issue with absorption, but I would say there's good chances that it will be sorted out.
Okay, thank you. Moritz, your take on that, having in mind that buzzwords like common debt and the relation of grants and loans are not easy to tackle with in your party group, I guess.
Yes, but I think, first of all, let me underline what Marta said. I think what we have to take in mind, we are in a different crisis than in the Euro crisis or we faced a few years ago. What is at stake right now is the functioning of the single market. This is what I also hear when I talk to lots of entrepreneurs in Germany. We especially, focused on exports and so on. So we have to take in mind that Germany will not be economically successful if Europe is not also economically successful. So I think what we need, of course, is a European answer. And I think from the different instruments which were discussed at European level, I think to do it through the European budget is the best way to do it, because what Marta said is right. It's the first time that the European Union is borrowing money, going to the financial markets at that amount, because the European Union is going to the market for several years, since I think 30 years or something, doing that already. What is new is borrowing the money and giving it through grants. This is really the new step. But I think, when we see the reality, the European reality, also what could be a majority, where it could be a landing zone where we could find a common ground, I think we will have to have some grants. This is also politically, I think, not doable in another way. What is more, what strikes me more is actually because, we don't have these discussions that, we are taking debt from Germany is taking debt from other member states. This is debt of the European Union. It's the European Union is, it's not that you're only responsible for your part in the budget. So it's not, that a big a risk for the member state. What strikes me more is when I look to, it's called EU Next Generation. And when I look at the balance for different generation, I think this is really what concerns me, because we will see lots of European money spent in the next 3 years. But then actually we see that the ordinary budget is smaller and smaller. Actually, what Michel proposes now, what is on the table now for the council is actually the smallest discussion on the MFF in the last year. So it's even smaller than anything what was proposed earlier. And a huge part of this EU Next Generation instrument is not going to European programs. So I had hoped that we would reinforce the European programs a little bit more. This is not happening. And then we have to see will there be own resources for the European Union? How will we pay this money back? It's a lot of money. How will it be paid back? The payback of the money should start with the next MFF. So how will this happen? And I see a little bit the danger that we have this common debt here, but that next generation have to pay it back, that the member states will not give more money to the European Union to pay it back, or not enough money to pay it back, and future MFF will be smaller, and this would mean, you know, hurting important European programs such as Erasmus, Digital Europe, Horizon Europe. And this is really more my concern, not so much the old discussion we're taking in depth for the Greeks or something like this, but the discussion, okay, you know, what is that actually for the future? What does this mean really? And how do we make sure that the European Union is able to act in the future also very strongly, and we can make sure that future MFFs are also very strong.
That's an interesting point, Moritz. So the danger of the program right now on expense of future MFFs. Marta, do you regard this as a problem as well, or is there any way out? What's your hunch on that?
I completely agree. I think there is a tendency in these negotiations right now to ignore a little bit the question of own resources because it's controversial, because the member states try to keep the package as simple as possible, so they get a compromise. This is understandable, but I think it's really not sustainable, and I think they should try to agree on own resources right now, because now they have this. It makes sense to agree now. There's urgency, the time is right. And as Moritz was saying, they risk agreeing into issuing common debt without really knowing how they're going to pay that back. And I think the more we wait, the less likely it is that we will have an agreement on own resources. So thinking that in 2024 or 25, we go back to this discussion and try again to agree on own resources, I think that's a risk that we should avoid, because at the moment, in the future, we don't know what the member states will do, and it will be less urgent. And I agree with what Moritz said. If there are no own resources, there's only two other options to pay this debt back. Either you increase contributions from member states based on their GNI, or you cut EU policies. And we can pretend that the member states will happily pay billions more into the budget, but experience shows that's not really the tendency they've had. So I would highly doubt that all the member states would just say, okay, I'm going to pay 10 billion more this time around, without really trying to fight for that. And we saw in the past MFFs, if member states don't want to increase their contributions, they will tend to cut EU programs. And I think there's really a risk that starting from the next MFF, but continuing until maybe 2050, who knows, the hit will be taken by EU programs, which will be cut, so that the increase in member states' contribution will be higher. This is a bit negative. Of course, we could also see that maybe in 10 years' time, the member states will agree to real new own resources to pay back for the debt. That is a possibility. The political landscape might change, as we have seen right at the moment, has changed a lot. But I think that today it's still an opportunity not to miss to really discuss new own resources, because this is the right time to introduce them, and the consequences are a bit, might be significant in the future.
Thank you. Yes, and of course the own resources. I mean, Moritz, the Parliament has a very own standpoint on that, right?
The Parliament is in favor of own resources. I personally, and I think my party is not in favor of all own resources, because we are also thinking about not putting new tax burdens on citizens and companies. I think this is really important. But generally speaking, I think we have to see that we have to have a discussion, I think, on the European level on the budget, on the financing of the European project, because we always see, and this is now also a problem right now because of the Corona crisis and of the recovery instrument and so on. We are not so much discussing about the normal budget. When we look at the normal MFF, we see that there is a huge part spent on agriculture and cohesion programs, and we have this, more. You say this is the traditional policies because this was where the policies where European integration was started, and then we have the so-called modern programs like Digital Europe, Horizon, Erasmus, also spending for the agencies such as Europol, Eurojust, and so on. And what we then always see, actually, when it comes to negotiation of the budget, we have the so-called net payers, or now the frugal four, who are fighting for a smaller budget because they do not want to pay so much into the European budget. And we say, yeah, they are so egoistic, they don't want to pay so much in the budget. But we also see is that on the other side, we have the net receivers. We have these countries who are receiving lots of money from the European Union, and they are actually very careful that they receive their funds and their money. So and then we have this fighting, and normally the compromise is something falls off the table, and normally that's Horizon, so our research program, or it's more money for Europol or other stuff. And actually, when you would ask the citizens, I think what they actually want to see from the European Union is, for example, that we would invest together in research, that we would be able to really, compete with the US and China when it comes to artificial intelligence. What we bring on the table there, all the member states alone and the European Union together, is not so much. And actually, if we would combine it really on the European level, we would have a chance. Also, when it comes to crime, cross-border crime, nobody is against, I think, funding Europol more to really, make it a European FBI working on cross-border crime. And lots of citizens would support it. But, in the end, when it comes to this net payer, net receiver discussion, this is always falling under the table. This is why the European Parliament is so much in favor of own resources. I think we have to be transparent here. So we should say what we want from each level. So what do we want the European level to do? Then we have to fund it. We have to fund this. And then we also have to take in mind maybe what can we cut in national budgets, because when we do something together at the European level, maybe on a more efficient way, we can cut something on national budget. This would be actually the discussion, the real discussion we would need. Again, with this budget, I don't see that this will really happen. Modernization of the budget looks not really good, and this is actually what I think we have to talk about. And this is also the reason the Parliament is pushing for own resources. But then I think we have to look at what own resources and not just additional new taxes, because I think this will also hurt a little bit the European idea. People say, okay, now we have to pay additional taxes and so on for the European fear. I think we have to then discuss with the member states, where does the money come from? Maybe a part of something, of a tax stronger contribution to the European level, something like this.
So Moritz, is a strong pledge for shaping the right budget for the right priorities. I mean, yeah. which brings me to the discussion of governance, because we have, of course, both with regard to the Multiannual Financial Framework and the recovery plan, the issue of governance and the issue of conditionality, which touches on the same points. What do you assess, again, a question to the two of you, the biggest problem, the biggest elephant in the room on this weekend with regard to, well, let's take them both, conditionality and governance. Marta, you start?
Yes, thanks. For sure, these will be the two main issues, I think. On governance, we are talking about the next generation EU, so the recovery plan only. There's not really a change to governance for what concerned the MFF. The governance issue is related to this facility for recovery and resilience, which would disburse the main part of the grants, but also the loans on requests. And so what was proposed by the Commission was that the member states receiving the money would draft a sort of a plan on outlining how they would intend to spend this money. And then the Commission would approve it or reject it, or ask for modifications and so on. What is on the table now, it's a stronger role for the European Council in approving or rejecting these plans, these investment plans. And the governance of these is one of the main issues, because we have seen Charles Michel has proposed that Council would approve or reject these by qualified majority. While we see other countries, notably the Netherlands, insist for unanimity so basically giving a veto to every member state on the plans that the other member states make, outlining how they intend to invest the money. I think this will be a big issue, but I think honestly that I think at the end, the Netherlands will have to drop the unanimity because I don't see how the other member states will ever agree to a unanimity on approving the plans. And also, I think it would be really a mistake to have a unanimous approval of these plans. Unanimity entails a lot of horse trading, and we see that in the MFF negotiations. And I think what we would want to avoid as much as possible is horse trading on how the member states will use their money for the recovery. Imagine if every member state has a veto, it also means that they have a veto on the others. So imagine two member states vetoing each other until, it's a quid pro quo. I give you my yes on this and you give me a yes on this. And if you don't give me a yes on mine, I will block everything you want to do. And I think this is really, it really would hurt the recovery, because it will take then a lot of time to get this through, and the efficiency of the whole thing would suffer. So on governance, I think the compromise will at the end be qualified majority. Maybe we were discussing just before, Charles Michel has suggested a sort of emergency break, that it's not really clear how it would work, but it would allow a certain member state, if they have serious concerns, to prompt a more detailed discussion on some national plans. Maybe that's part of the solution, but I think unanimity will not be there. On conditionalities, so the two that are most mentioned are reforms and the rule of law. These two are quite different actually in how they're designed. The reform conditionality is only concerning the next generation EU money that is channeled through the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So it's only about the bulk of the grants, let's say, and this is what member states would have to respect in the national plans that I was just mentioning. The issue on this conditionality is that at the beginning it was intended to be, for example, on that the money would have to be spent on investment related to the green recovery, the digitalization of the economy, with the respect of the European semester and the country-specific recommendations. What some countries want, including the frugals, is a stronger reform commitment that would go beyond simply investment priorities. but that would also touch on structural reforms such as pension reforms, healthcare. And this is very contentious because in some, especially southern member states, it brings memories of the sovereign debt crisis, where you would have this famous troika exchanging money for reforms, let's say austerity and all of that. So I think this will be a bit contentious. The rule of law, instead, it's not necessarily related only to Next Generation EU. This is expected to be a mechanism that is EU budget wise, so it would apply to the MFF and to Next Generation EU. But yes, this is also very contentious. Maybe I'll let Moritz talk more about this, since it's more of his area. But that would also apply to the whole EU budget and has been on the table actually for quite a long time.
Yeah, thank you for this perfect analysis with a lot of points we can touch on. Moritz, of course, the big elephant in the room is the rule of law, and maybe a person from Budapest who has very own ideas on that with a veto function. But before we come to this, are you or is the fact of governance and conditionality with regard to the recovery plan an opportunity, or opens it an opportunity to invest in real European projects?
So I did not completely get your question, because I also had it with Marta. I don't know if it's I hope you can hear me. I hope
we can hear you loud and clear.
The Wi-Fi is perfect, hopefully perfect, but there was the cut in your question.
No, we had no problem with you. I come back to my question. So question one, of course, is your assessment on the rule of law thing.
Yes.
And number two would be with regard to the recovery plan. If this is, when you look at the conditionalities, an opportunity to invest in the European project, so that no money will flow into some national things which are not European.
So first of all, I think the rule of law conditionality, Marta already mentioned, this will be a hot topic in the Council, of course, and it's long debated. It's a long-standing position of the European Parliament that we want to have a rule of law conditionality. We have to stop that actually we are funding with European money actually people who are fighting against the European Union or against European values. And this is actually today the case. So we want to have a conditionality which is now on the table, where we could hold back the money. This is what is proposed by the European Commission. And the question is on the different, majorities, what would be needed to start this procedure. So Michel now proposes that the Commission proposes such a rule of law conditionality on a country when it's a breach of the rule of law, and then it has to be approved in the Council by a qualified majority. What we actually want in the European Parliament is that it is has to be stopped by a qualified majority. So there would be a reversed qualified majority, because otherwise it will always be a political debate. Some countries, especially Eastern countries, would just abstain, and then there would maybe not be a majority for it. So the Commission would be very, very sensitive in really, putting forward and using this mechanism. And then we are, again, where we have been. Maybe also another idea we bring forward as Renew Europe is a smart conditionality. This was a very good idea developed by some of our experts in the Regi Committee. I would be very interested also to hear Marta's opinion on this, because she's really also an expert on cohesion policy. Because we propose that we don't only hold the money back, but we give the Commission the responsibility when we see a breach of rule of law to manage the funds directly. So we would give the money to the beneficiaries, but directly through the European Commission, not at first to some country, maybe Hungary, but it's to be honest, we should not always talk only about Hungary here. And this would really solve the problem, because we would not hurt the people and beneficiaries, but we would make sure that Orban and others are not able to let the money flow into the pockets of their cronies. So this is also what we propose. Maybe on your second question concerning, how the money will flow in really European priorities, I think a big part of the EU Next Generation, as Marta already mentioned, is going through the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So this is the big chunk of the money, you could say, yeah. And this is actually going directly to the member states, and they have an allocation key. Then they have to apply for some programs they want to finance with it, some reforms they want to finance with it. Commission then has to accept it, and then there's the big discussion on the governance. Marta already mentioned. Is there a majority? Is there unanimity in the council? We as a European Parliament would actually say we have to have a say in this too, because this is European money. This is not, some thing what the council alone should decide. And what I think here, on the one hand, if you have a very, strict conditionality for what the money can be spent, then we will have problems, of course, with implementation, because it will be difficult, to spend the money. But on the other hand, if we want to make sure that the money is going in the right direction, I think it's really important that we use the European semester, that we strengthen the European semesters through this mechanism, that we put it in digital and green priorities. So it would not really hurt, our priorities, but, strengthen them. So I would personally argue for a stronger conditionality here, because I know that there are sensitivities in the south of Europe, especially, they think there's the next troika coming, but actually it's a different thing here. The troika was giving loans and cutting everything to, make the countries able to finance themselves on the market. Now we come with lots of European money given to them directly. I think you couldn't say, we help you, European, not we help you, but European Union is supporting all of the member states. But then we also have to make sure that, everybody is better off, and that is really helping in the European future. And I think we could be a bit strict there, because this is a different discussion. But of course, this will be very highly debated, because then we really have the different camps in the council, the Eastern Europe, Southern Europe. We see already that yesterday Orban had a meeting, or was it the day before, with Portugal's prime minister. Yeah. Now Portugal is saying, oh no, we don't need a rule of law conditionality and so on. So this will be very interesting to see how it will be discussed in the council.
Exactly. I can bring in here a question from the audience, which exactly fits in what you said. How about Italy with regard to the mentioned reform agenda and supervision of the European semester? How strict will this conditionality be, or should be, in your opinion? You made your word on that, Moritz. Marta, what is your expectation on that? And maybe a word on the smart conditionality idea Moritz mentioned.
Yes, thanks. I think this is a good chance to strengthen the European semester, the country-specific recommendations. In the past, we have seen these recommendations very often remain recommendations. So enforceability of European semester suggestions has been relatively low. Is exactly because there was no money attached to it. This time instead, by attaching money to the recommendations, there's actually a bigger incentive to member states to actually do something about this recommendation. So overall, I think that's quite, it was quite a smart thing to do, also because the European semester is a mechanism that is well known, that is member states are familiar with it, so it's not a completely new thing imposing things on the countries. About the strictness of conditionalities and the European semester, I think here there needs to be a good balance to be found between flexibility and strictness. The reason is the more strict the conditionalities, the more time needed to negotiate those and then to apply those. And here, both sides actually have a good argument. On the one hand, one would want very strict conditionalities so that one can ensure that the money is spent on exactly some specific things. On the other side, doing this takes time, and when we need spending for a quick economic recovery, so a quick fiscal stimulus, time is of essence. So thinking that because of all this process, the money could maybe be committed in more than a year's time, I think that's a risk that would harm the nature of this funding, which is the recovery. Of course, at the same time, it's good to kill two birds with one stone. You have the recovery, and at the same time, you push for common priorities, greening, digitalization, efficiencies of reforms, and all of that. But I think what the member states will have to figure out, and also later in the more technical discussions, is this balance between the conditions, but also making sure that this is money that can be spent relatively quickly. On the smart conditionalities, I think that in principle is a good idea. I have to say I'm not entirely familiar with the proposal, but I think this in principle makes a lot of sense actually, because you would skip basically the problematic level of authorities, so maybe the member states or the regional authorities, and go directly to the beneficiaries. The major issue I see with that is that the Commission wouldn't necessarily have a lot of capacity to do that. So I would expect that they would need a lot more resources, whether money, but also human resources, to manage directly programs in the countries. The second issue I might see with that is that there might be less national ownership of these programs if, for example, the regional authorities are cut out from deciding which programs are accepted or not for cohesion funding. But I think in principle, actually, it could be a good way to enforce rule of law conditions without having the beneficiaries suffer from the lack of funding, which in some countries is actually quite significant amount of public investment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem I think with smart conditionality could be that it brings a new a line of administration into the whole process, of course, but it's always good to have alternative ideas. Maybe it helps in horse trading. I don't know. Before we come back on the timeline and the role of the parliaments, I want to touch upon that. Let's go for a moment back to the distribution pattern of the money which is on the table. Do you consider this as a huge problem in the hours to come in the council, or will they simply deal with that professionally? Here a little more, there a little less. What's your expectations on that? Maybe we start with Moritz.
So the allocation key, I think we already saw. We saw a little change here. This was in the video conference. The leaders had their video conference summit a few weeks ago. This was very highly debated because actually the allocation key the Commission proposed was concerning the GDP and especially the unemployment rates in the different countries for the last 5 years. And lots of member states said, this is not, the corona response is not in line with the actual development of the economies in the corona crisis. So what Michel now proposes, actually, I think, is that we stick to the Commission's allocation key, but for the next years to come. So what for the next year, stick to the allocation key, but for the next years to come, use then really the real economic development. So countries which have a huge or bad economic development get more money. So I think 30% of the sum of the recovery resilience facility would then be distributed in that way. I think this will help to find a compromise in the council, but of course this will be also very highly debated, because in the end they are fighting, all of them fighting for, you know, their money and their money they will get out of the recovery resilience facility. But I think this could be a landing zone, so to say, in this Brussels negotiation language. It's a landing zone where there could be a compromise.
A zone in the box, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Where is your zone in the box, Marta, on that issue?
So indeed, allocation is an issue. Many have actually criticized that using unemployment for the past 5 years, it's not really the right indicator. I think the reason why the Commission did that, there's two. One is that it's actually working quite well, even if it's not related to the COVID crisis, to identify the countries that have been hit by the COVID crisis. So when you use unemployment, you get actually, by chance, let's say, that the countries hit most by the COVID crisis are also those that have higher employment. And these are, for example, Spain, Italy, France, and Greece. So I think it was also chosen as a sort of proxy to sort of identify the COVID-related issues. The second issue is that COVID-related indicators are very new. So there's little reliability on this kind of things at the moment, which is why Jean-Michel suggested to look at this GDP reduction related to COVID in 2022, when we will have a real assessment of this kind of effort, of this kind of impacts. Which is understandable, but at the same time, I think that the proposal of Charles Michel leaves too much uncertainty that we wouldn't need at the moment. Why? Because the member states would plan this year or next year investment based on only 70% of the total. And they would not know how much at the end they would get. And I think this is a bit ineffective, because it's best to know, to plan in advance. So it's best to know as soon as possible with certainty how much your reform, your investment, and all of that can actually can represent in terms of funding. But I see the struggle, and it's indeed Charles Michel tried to put a balance here and there. Something else that maybe could have been used, but again, the reliability of data is a bit, an issue. For example, we see with React-EU, so those 50 billion euros on top of cohesion policy, those are allocated on even different criteria. That, for example, look at the change in unemployment between January and the date when it will be decided, so later on this year. But they also look at the difference in unemployment between January 2019 and January 2020. Now, January, it's a bit too early, I would say, but maybe going into this direction could be an option. But again, it's very unreliable, and I would see already the member states in a few years say, well, it's actually all wrong, because at the end, what you assumed in 2020 was not how it turned out. So yes, I would say there's not a really ideal solution here. I think something that has a bit of both, like Charles Michel has proposed, will likely be what they will agree on at the end.
So a lot of things on the table. We talked about conditionality. We talked about governance. We talked about the package as a whole. But I mean, let's assume there is a deal be struck on the weekend or in 2 weeks' time. Then, of course, apart from programming, the parliaments have their say. And we are talking a lot about Hamiltonian moments of creating federal state-like Europe. But isn't there a bigger fear right now of not a Hamiltonian, but a Valonian moment, that somewhere in Europe there is a parliament which simply says no to any kind of deal? What is, and maybe not the Valonian parliament, but maybe the European Parliament, Moritz?
So what you mentioned is completely right. So the deal, not the MFF, but especially the own resources decision is up to the national parliaments to decide on. So this has, this is also, you know, the difficulty for the council, because they have to really, you know, find a deal they can bring through every parliament. This is
so the parliament is at the table in the council. That's a good note.
Yes, and then, you know, on the second thing, it's the European Parliament has to accept the MFF, and we have very strong resolutions on the MFF. We always were you know, eager to negotiate also with the council, and for me it's open. You know, when we will see what deal is on the table. I think the European Parliament would also be prepared to say, you know, for the first time, you know, we won't accept this. We want to have changes. So this was also in the past the case, that we, you know, had some changes then also to the agreement to bring it through the European Parliament, because you have to take in mind that this is a new Parliament. It is not this old grand majority, SND and EPP, but you need minimum is 3 political groups. So Renew Europe is at the heart of the agreement. Also maybe the Greens, and we are really critical on the rule of law conditionality. This is for us really a key issue, and also. The European Parliament is looking very carefully on the MFF, because we do not want to hurt the long-term budget of the European Union. So we will have still negotiations over the summer, I think, with the European Parliament, and it's not, you know, a done deal when it's through the Council.
So the deal is not done before the deal is done. That is not the final remark, but we have one
nothing
minute
agreed.
left.
This is another
Nothing
saying, you know, nothing is
agreed.
agreed until everything is agreed. So we have this nice Brussels negotiation slang here,
exactly.
You know, the landing zone, the nego box, and nothing is agreed until everything.
Moritz, we are a little running out of time, and I will leave both of you with one final question. You are much younger, both of you much younger than me. So in 2058, Moritz will run for his 9th term in the European Parliament, and Marta will be at the lead of the EPC, I don't know, or you have your own think tank. What is your expectations? Are we going to have at that time huge own resources in the European framework, or do we still do an intergovernmental EU? Short and quick answer, please. Marta.
That's a great question. Saying I don't know would be too easy a way out, I guess. So I will go with, I think there will be further integration. I think we reached a point where going back to less integration, it's impossible. And I think the more, I'll stop here.
Sorry for that, but
No worries.
Moritz.
I think we have a parliamentary democracy at the European Union at that stage, and I hope it's not for me about own resources, but I hope that we have a budget that is really, prioritizing the right priorities and really puts the financial means behind it to really be able and competitive in a globalized world. This is what I hope for in 2058.
Thank you so much. And so we could end on a very positive note with regard to the future. Thanks a lot. We are 1 minute over time, but I think due to the very important issue we discussed and the lively debate we had, that is very much okay. Thank you, both of you, for your time. Happy to have you on the show on further occasions. And so now back to work with regard to 2058. Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot to the audience. Hope you had a good time and a few insights in the negotiation box. See you soon on this channel.
Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.